Hello, School Transportation Nation. This is Taylor Hannon here, Associate Editor at STN, and I am so excited to be back talking to you guys again, but also it is the 90th episode, which means there's only 10 more episodes until we hit 100, and that is so incredibly insane. Like, hats off to our producer, Claudia, who makes this happen, and to Ryan and Tony for doing this every week, and of course, Kent, our sound magician back there, making all the magic happen. But wow, okay, we are 10 episodes away from 100. That is exciting. This episode is brought to you by TransFinder, the leader in school bus routing software, and our safety tip is brought to you by Friedman Seating, North America's trusted source for transportation safety solutions. Speaking of TransFinder, here's a message from them now. Are you struggling with driver shortages, drivers retiring or having to quarantine? How about the impact vaccine mandates may have on your remaining drivers? TransFinder is hearing these concerns from many in the industry. And while there is no replacement for having more drivers, it is critical that you have the tools needed to deal with emergencies that pop up. That's where Route Finder Plus's trips absorption function comes in. You can reduce routes, use fewer drivers, and adapt to the changing climate. Just like NFL teams use electronic playbooks to make changes in real time during the game, TransFinder technology helps give you more control than ever when conditions on the field change. You can make strategic changes that reduce the impact on your families. Check out Plus's trip absorption, because this driver shortage is no game. To learn more, email getplus@transfinder.com. Type STM Podcast in the subject line. Or call 1-800-373-3609 to learn more. With that, let's jump into some quick headlines before I turn you guys over to a great interview that's coming up. Not 100% sure on this, but I'm thinking by the time you're listening to this, the infrastructure bill should have been signed. The House passed it last week, and then I read some articles that it was going to get signed on Monday of this week. So depending on when you're listening to this, it could be in law. But essentially, this is the bill that gives $5 billion in new federal funding over 5 years for electric and low emission school buses. So if you guys haven't read this, or if you don't know what's going on, we have an article up on it, stnonline.com. Definitely check that out. And I also want to turn you guys to the special report section. I just wrote an article that kind of looks at a survey that was done by 3M. And it talks about adults and their perception on how their child gets to school and if they think that roadway is safe. And it's super interesting because it's not just, the United States or Canada. It was done globally. So I think that's really interesting. And then also in the special report, I kind of break it down for North America. So you can kind of look at how that compares to the rest of the world. But it's a super interesting special report. So also, if you're on the website, check that out. Check out our special report section. We have lots of good content there. Also, at this time, we could be at TSD, the Transporting Students with Disabilities Conference in Frisco, Texas. So if you guys are listening to this and you're there, or if you're still considering whether or not, you can register on site. So if you're on the border and you're like, should I go? Should I not go? Go. It's going to be a great time. It's going to be a lot of fun, and you can still register on site. And if you can't make it to Texas this year, we still do have STN Expo in Reno, the 4th through the 9th, and you can register on site for that conference as well. So I definitely encourage you guys to try and get out of the office a little bit, come to one of these shows or both of these shows, say hi to us in person. It would be great to see you. And I hope you guys learn something and take some knowledge back with you to your operations. So check out stnexpo.com to see the agenda on those conferences, who the keynote speakers are going to be, to get hotel information, all of that in one place, stnexpo.com. Next, we have an exciting interview. I don't know if you guys have seen or heard about this guy, but Mike Mason is a former FBI agent, and we have him here on the podcast coming right up, an exciting interview with Mr. Ryan Gray. So stay tuned and let's jump right into that.
Thanks so much, Taylor. Very happy to bring to the School Transportation Nation podcast stage Mike Mason. Many of you nationwide might have read the article that Taylor wrote recently on stonline.com about Mike, and he's been picked up in the nation's press. Google Mike Mason FBI, and you get this long list of articles. Mike is a retired FBI special agent. He actually was the executive assistant director of FBI's criminal division, as well as being a special agent in charge and a director in charge of a couple of field offices. And what makes Mike so special is he's a school bus driver now. So he actually retired back in 2007, went to work for Verizon as their chief security officer. And he retired last year, saw this horrendous driver shortage that we have. And here he is driving a school bus for Chesterfield Public Schools near Richmond, Virginia. So I want to welcome Mike. Thanks so much for joining us.
Well, thanks, Ryan. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
So I gave people a little rundown of who you are. So what got you interested in driving school buses? I mentioned you read about this, but what actually made you want to say, hey, I'm going to jump out of retirement and jump behind the wheel?
Well, I knew I wanted to do something. And on the day that I decided I didn't want to go back into an executive type job, there was a news report talking about the lack of school bus drivers in Chesterfield County. And I turned around and I said, that's what I'm going to do, because what I wanted to do was somehow contribute to our post-pandemic recovery. And I also thought that getting students back in front of teachers was critically important. There's so much that virtual education is second best, but it's second best by 20 furlongs because there's so much that goes on in the classroom that cannot be replicated on a computer. And I also thought, to be honest with you, that everybody assumes that all the children have 5G access, they have all the tools that they need for virtual training to support virtual training. And they don't. And many of those students happen to look like me. As an African-American male, I was very concerned with how children in communities where everybody may not have that type of equipment, how they would fare being away from school.
Absolutely. What a great role model you are. You mentioned being African-American, and I found an FBI website, actually a video with you where it commemorated 100 years of African-American special agents in the FBI. And this was back in 2019. So this was, I think you were at Verizon by then. Oh, yeah. We're still there at that point. But certainly what a great role model to show children of all ages and creeds and colors, the professionalism and where you can go with your life when you really buckle down and you have drive and passion. And about some of that, so I want to go back to your younger days. I learned that like a lot of folks, a lot of kids, you grew up wanting to be a police officer, and you grew up on the south side of Chicago, right?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
There was a police officer who lived behind us on the second block behind me, Mr. Lloyd. Mr. Lloyd was a Chicago police officer, and he was my first hero. He was the first person I wanted to emulate. And then every contact I had with police was always positive things happening, not the kind of stories you read about in the media today that I'm sure don't represent but a tiny, tiny percentage of all the interactions that Americans have with police every day. Most of those, I would argue, are positive. And so when I saw that, I said, I wanted to be a part of that. I started reading about the FBI in about 7th grade. And that's when my dream morphed from being a Chicago police officer to being an FBI special agent.
And now, how many years were you in the FBI?
I was in the FBI for 23 years.
23 years. And ended up, I think your highest post there was executive assistant director of FBI's criminal division. Is that the...
Actually, I was executive assistant director of the criminal branch, which included the criminal, cyber, and response divisions in the FBI at that time.
Okay. And speaking of criminal, and you just touched on it, we were talking about this a little bit earlier, where so often, especially in today's media cycle, you look at just a few bad apples, right, and it rottens the entire bunch and it gets blown up. Right. We've obviously, you mentioned, we see that, and we've seen that for several years now. That's been the national conversation with police officers. I want to get your thoughts, in terms of schools, right? And school resource officers. we've written on this topic before. And we know that, there are not school resource officers riding school buses,
Right.
but there's a lot of that interaction. And just like anything throughout the school district, there needs to be that communication and that collaboration and that training.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any experience working with the SROs? Are SROs at Chesterfield Public Schools?
If they are, I haven't been able to interface with any of them. I'm there first thing in the morning, dropping the students off and then leaving. And so if there are officers assigned to the schools, I have not yet met any. I've met one who was not a sworn officer, but she was a part of the police department, and she was working for a particular school. And she and I did talk for a while about the kind of challenges she faces and things like that.
And I would imagine you come down in the conversation against this whole defund the police. Obviously, we know where you stand. You don't think that that's a very good idea.
No, I think people don't even understand what that means when they say defund the police.
Exactly.
And I think there needs to be more specific. If you're going to talk about it, at least talk about it intelligently. Getting rid of the police is, quite frankly, the dumbest thing I ever heard. Defunding the police to add other types of resources that are necessary, because a police officer today is asked to be everything. And they're also asked to be too many things that they're not properly trained to be, like psychotherapists and things like that. So if we're going to redirect funding, it needs to be done in an effective way. We need to understand what we're solving for and making sure any action along those lines actually has some probability of solving that problem.
Absolutely. Well said. That's, something that I personally think, and I think that it's, again, an example of what you were mentioning earlier of this sensationalism, where the media especially uses these tag words to kind of, sum up things, or activists use these tag words that, you don't necessarily know what they mean.
Right.
And it really, goes against the grain of that communication, and it turns people off instead of bringing people to the table to talk about it. Moving on from that, or kind of related to that, I wanted to talk about school bus drivers. And, there was a report several years ago by CBS News that I forget what there's something happened. I think it was one of the high profile crashes that don't happen very often, but when they do, they make the national news, they get in the 24-hour news cycle, and they get sensationalized. And essentially that report made it sound like there's school bus drivers running around America who are drunk and on drugs, or who are touching children, abusing children. I think one of the facts that they gave was about one school bus driver is arrested each week. So, you just do some simple math. There's 52 weeks in a year. You have about 500,000 school bus drivers, even say 450,000. Even if you say that 100 school bus drivers are arrested a year, that's like 0.00001%. So, you've interacted with school bus drivers, and I don't know what your experience with school bus drivers was before you joined Chesterfield Public Schools, but can you talk about what you've learned about school bus drivers, especially from your past law enforcement career and that lens that you wear? What impresses you about school bus drivers and their training and their background?
Well, what really impresses me about all the school bus drivers I've met, and to your point, I grew up on the south side of Chicago, so all schools were neighborhood schools. I never rode a school bus in my life until I started driving a school bus. Well, we went on some field trips where we had school buses, but I did not ride on a school bus every day. The drivers I've met here, if there's one common characteristic, they all refer to their students as my students. They all seem to genuinely care about the students that they're transporting. We have cleaning protocols at the end of the day to combat the spread of COVID. And I see all the bus drivers, I see them cleaning their buses. I see them taking care of their buses as if they are transporting, which some are, their own children. So the school bus drivers I've met, and some are retirees like me who've re-entered the workforce, they seem very serious about what they do. And Chesterfield County is very serious about the kinds of backgrounds it conducts to hire school. But I had to go through a background. I had to go and be fingerprinted. And I just left being a corporate security head and then left the FBI as number 4 on the food chain. And I still had to go through the exact same process. The bus drivers get registered into a national system, a national database. So if you're caught, for example, driving a school bus while intoxicated, which I can't even imagine, that would be unforgivable in my mind, but that follows you. So that follows you with your commercial driver's license. So I think a lot of things are in place to ensure that as few bad apples become school bus drivers as possible. Now, you could hire a legitimate, nice pillar of the community to be a school bus driver who could go bad while he's being a school bus driver. But the effort is, in my mind, a genuine effort to make sure that they're hiring the right people. After all, we're not transporting packages, we're transporting people, and young people, very young people.
The most precious cargo.
Absolutely.
And I want to get to the precious cargo you're transporting in a moment, but I want to stay on the subject of criminal background checks. So in your opinion, in your expert opinion, what can be done to potentially, shore up the background check process? Is there things that can be done differently, can be done better?
Well, the quality of any background is how much you're willing to invest in it and how broadly you want that background to go. I'm guessing that most of the school districts, they contract that work out. And it really depends on, in terms of what gets done, it really depends on how much you're willing to pay for it. So, you can do a credit and criminal. I would suggest that the average school bus driver does not undergo the same background that I underwent to become a special agent of the FBI. Not anything even close. And where the gaps are there is that you could have somebody who's lived someplace for 7 years. That's how far most employment backgrounds go back. So if you only go back 7 years and it's not an in-depth background, you could potentially miss some bad apples. And you could miss some bad apples no matter how much you spend on the background. But if I were going to shore it up, it would be in terms of what's the investment you're looking for? What is it, what problem are you actually trying to solve? And are you investing enough to make sure that you solve that problem?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Hey, great interview so far. We'll be right back to that engaging conversation, but I want to take a minute for our safety tip for this week, which is brought to you by Friedman Seating, North America's trusted source for transportation safety solutions. Who's buckled and who's not? Why guess? SeatLink by Friedman Seating monitors occupancy and seatbelt status of school and activity bus passengers. As federal and local regulations continue to advance safety initiatives, including 3-point seatbelt usage, SeatLink offers a practical solution. The system records and communicates to the driver when a passenger sits in the seat and buckles a seatbelt, or buckles a seatbelt before sitting. The wireless system is expandable up to 90 passengers. Don't look back, look forward with SeatLink. Visit friedmanseating.com for information, videos, and to request a demo. That's all from me. Back to Mike and Ryan.
I mentioned this earlier when we were talking. Tragically, this industry, we lost a school bus driver in Washington State earlier this year, Richard Leonard. He was stabbed to death on the bus. Mind-boggling. I believe it's at least in modern history, it's the third school bus driver to be murdered behind the wheel or, in the line of duty. Obviously that hits any school bus driver, whether they're, past, present, or future, extremely hard. I want to, get your thoughts on that because you've obviously probably seen a lot through your FBI career. But when someone's doing their job and they're doing it for the kids and they're driving their kids and this kind of thing happens, I know that, there's only so much that we as an industry can plan and prepare for.
Right.
But I'm just interested in your thoughts on just being vigilant as school bus drivers, as they're driving through communities, they're the eyes and ears, right? Maybe even more so than some law enforcement because they're out on the same runs, same streets every single day. They get to know the neighborhoods like the back of their hand.
Sure.
Just kind of curious what your thoughts are.
Well, you really do get to know the neighborhood like the back of your hand. I wave at joggers and dog walkers every day of the week that I see at the same spot at the same time every day. I think it's important to highlight that death of that bus driver is an anomaly. It's not something that happens every day. Because of the 24-hour news cycle, it shrinks the world. So it makes something that happens in San Diego, California, while I'm sitting here in Midlothian, Virginia, sound like it's right next door to me and that it might happen to me. So I think that what I'm against is talking about 99% solutions for 1% problems. So you could say a bus driver died, therefore we need to put a police officer on every single bus in America. Well, that of course is absurd. And that would not be addressing any particular trending problem, but rather one anomalous act. You could have that happen with, school bus drivers that transport high schoolers, for example, and maybe there's a high schooler, maybe there's a gang member on the bus. You could have any number of things happen that represent an anomalous incident. So you could have a gang member on a bus. He's going through a particular neighborhood. That neighborhood, somebody in that neighborhood, for whatever reason, has decided they want to get him, and that's the way to get him on that bus. And obviously there could be tragic consequences from that. I don't know that there's a whole lot actually to do to address that particular concern. The buses have cameras on the inside, but that's mainly for making sure we're monitoring school bus driver behavior so that if an accusation is made, you have the cameras in there taking pictures. They can come, they can get the video out, and they can check against that. But other than that, I would say that, every bus driver needs to be vigilant if they're hearing about gang activity or they're hearing about some particular threat against even somebody on their bus, or somebody on their bus indicates that they have a fear of something. We need to be talking about those things and making sure that the police are aware of that when those situations occur. And I would suggest, without data to support this sort of empirical observation, that those kinds of things are very, very rare.
Absolutely. Yes. Well said. So I promised that I wanted to ask you about your kids on the bus. So I understand that you are driving a special needs route for Chesterfield Public Schools?
Special education, yes, a special education. And I drive my kids to a private institution that deals with children who reside on the autistic spectrum somewhere.
Okay. And what kind of training did you get when you joined Chesterfield? So when you joined, did you know that you were going to be driving a special ed route? How did that come about?
I did not. They talked about special ed children in the training. I mean, it's not in-depth training as one would think you might need because I don't really think that that's necessary. But they did focus on, for some period of my training, on special ed buses. And then they just asked, would I be interested? And I said, sure, I'd be interested in driving whatever you want me to do, but certainly children who are in special education programs. I think they have some special needs. The school I transport them to, what I love about that school, first of all, is that it exists. Because when I was a child, those kind of schools didn't exist. And all those people are trying to do is get each one of those children to self-actualize, like all of us want to do. How can I be the best Mike Mason I can possibly be? That's all those teachers and instructors and counselors are trying to do with these students. Now, their self-actualization may be that one day they can feed, bathe, and clothe themselves by themselves. But that we spend as a society, that we spend time and resources and money trying to get these children to a maximum position is just outstanding to me. And the people who work there, many of whom are in their early 20s, they are just an impressive bunch of people. They really are. They measure progress in tiny, tiny little increments, and yet they get dressed, they go to work every day to address this issue.
Absolutely. And do you have any aides that ride on your buses, or is it?
I do. I have an aide that rides on my bus. And I'll tell you, Ryan, what we do, we spend a lot of time trying to understand the language of the 14 children that I transport each day, nine in the morning, in the afternoon, and 5 later in the afternoon. We spend time trying to figure out what makes them happy, what makes them sad, what do they like to do while they're on the bus. I love it when my bus is a cacophony of different noises. They may not be related. They may be orbiting in an individual space, but I love when they're making nothing but happy sounds. And we try to make ourselves aware of, do we have, a volcano that's about to erupt. And how do we read that sign? I start each day with a clean slate. Each day, I don't hold anything against any child for a bad behavior the day before or anything else, because I think most of their bad behaviors are not done with malice aforethought. They're just not.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And curious, since this is your first year driving, correct?
Yes, correct.
So we're about almost at the halfway point of your first school year. Is this something that you're going to want to continue?
I actually drove a little bit last year at the end of last school year and then through this school year. I can't say that I'm going to keep doing it because I have other things I want to do. I've written a book. I hope to do some speaking around that book. It won't be ready for publication until next month, but I hope to do some speaking around that. I also, believe it or not, when I was an FBI supervisor, I did some jailhouse outreach. And that was really impactful to me. And I saw a lot of smart, articulate young men who shouldn't be spending their time in jail. I don't mean shouldn't be spending it because they did something bad. Now they're paying the price for that. I mean, never should have done the bad thing, but had nobody. My whole life, I've had people lifting me up over the bowl in which I existed to show me the rest of the world. And a lot of these young men don't have that. So that's something I also want to do. And I'm hoping to do that beginning in the latter half of 2022.
Okay. And then we talk about this a lot in the magazine and at our conferences. School bus drivers in a lot of neighborhoods and a lot of communities across the nation, they may be the first adult that some of these children are seeing. Certainly the first adult representative of the school district, right?
Correct.
That they go to, but it could be the first adult that they see. So school bus drivers, to your point that you were just mentioning, providing that role modeling.
Oh, absolutely. I think there's all kinds of opportunity for that. I even have one student on my bus who's very interested in the fact I was in the Marine Corps and I was in the FBI. And he's very shy, though. So I sent his mother a text and said, listen, I know he's really shy. He's not likely to have a conversation with me. But if he has any questions, please let him know he can text me or he can email me and I'll communicate with him that way. And what I would have done is CC'd his mom or dad on every one of those communications so that they don't have to be worried that there's something else going on under the guise of trying to do some career counseling. But I would love to do that. And so any opportunity I get to speak at an audience, I've already made myself available to one school to speak at a career day audience. The problem is that the time that they're doing it is a time that I'm driving. But I let them know if there are other opportunities, I would love to do that as well. Because I believe you're right. We are the first representative they see of the school district, and we do have an opportunity to be an influencer to the children we transport.
What's been the hardest part of driving a school bus?
Oh, well, I think the hardest part was just learning how to drive it. You know, it's funny. A lot of my friends said, man, you're going to be the most overqualified bus driver ever. I said, what are you talking about? I'm not even a qualified bus driver yet. And so, you know, we conflate different skill sets and assume that if we put one skill at a lower spot, which I would argue against as well, that somebody who occupies what we would think of as a higher level position can automatically do that. But driving that school bus, I mean, it's been amazing. Things that I was doing in training that I thought, oh my God, please don't ever let me have to make that maneuver. And I do those things 2 or 3 times a day now.
Yeah. And with the driver shortage, because again, that's what brought you into this role to begin with. I won't say that, you know, you joining Chesterfield Public Schools solved their driver shortage. They might still have one. Is that something that is burdening you and your fellow drivers? I mean, are you actively kind of going through that right now with Chesterfield, where there's just you need more bodies behind the wheel?
I certainly think it's impacting some drivers. They're having to do double backs. They're having to pick up shifts. I pick up probably once a week an extra run. I think we are on the way to solving the problem. We have a lot of drivers in training now. So when they can't be behind the wheel, they're coming on my bus as an aid. I'm showing them about how to hook up wheelchairs, how to use the wheelchair lift, and how to deal with these children and how wonderful these children are. I've got 2 trainees now who are training to be school bus drivers who are saying, I think I want to drive a special education bus. They like the way we know all the children, we know their parents. And so I think we're on the road to having a healthy cadre of bus drivers, but it's going to take some time. I think COVID really impacted a lot of bus drivers because they stopped driving for a while, and these people had to go and find other work. So I think we will get healthy again in the not too distant future.
Okay. And this probably doesn't affect you much, but one of the reasons why we've traditionally had a shortage and just is at an emergency level now, and a lot of it is due to COVID, but it's pay. Mm-hmm. One can argue that for the responsibility the school bus drivers shoulder, they're not paid enough. But the stark reality is many folks in public education aren't paid enough. Your thoughts on compensation for school bus drivers? Is it a carrot type discussion that we needed to allocate more money, or do we need to do something else?
I think that's certainly part of the problem. I mean, if I'm going to be totally candid with you, if I was doing this for the money, I'm not sure that I wouldn't find work that was less stressful to do. I am carrying the most precious cargo any family has, their children. There are a lot of things that go on, a lot of traffic. We have administrative paperwork to do and things of that nature. So I do think that better pay, and Chesterfield County just recently raised the hourly rate for bus drivers, and I think that's had a positive impact. So I do think for too long, bus drivers and aides for that matter were underpaid. And I think addressing that holistically, maybe even across the country, we'll see more people wanting to become bus drivers. It's not an easy job. There's a lot of stress. You're driving a big vehicle, oftentimes in tight traffic, oftentimes with a cacophony of noise behind you. And so it takes a certain person. You have to enjoy it. And that's another thing I would say about 95% of the bus drivers I have met. They all enjoy their job. Even if they think they'd like to make more money or whatever their complaint might be, they all seem to enjoy their job. And I think that's critically important for someone who wants to become a bus driver.
Mm-hmm. And many of our audience, they know as well as anyone, most of them got their start as school bus drivers, and a lot of them, they've made very nice careers for themselves. Mm-hmm. Just like any job, you work up the ladder, right? You work up the ranks, and you can become a supervisor, director of transportation, fleet director. Sure. I know folks that have gone the transportation route, and now they're at the superintendent or in the assistant superintendent level. So certainly, just like anything, it can be a stepping stone.
Absolutely. Like many companies started out, you were loading trucks, and the next thing you know, the C-suite is occupied by everybody that drove a truck or loaded a truck. So I think school bus driving is the same way. So it's not like if you became a bus driver at 25, at 50, that's all the opportunity you have. There are lots of other opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of driving a truck, I understand your dad drove a truck, and that might be the what maybe set the wheels in motion long before you decided to become a FBI special agent, and before you ended up being a school bus driver.
Well, I always think I'm paying a little homage to my father every morning when I go through my pre-inspect and then I start up the vehicle. You may not believe it, but I'm laughing and smiling every day I get on that bus. Every day I start it up, I can't wait to get started. So I'm really, really enjoying it. I mean, I'm not, like I said earlier, I'm not going to do it forever, but I really do enjoy it now. And I hope that this talk and maybe the newspaper article and others induces people to consider becoming a bus driver, especially retirees who are looking to have a regular cadence to their life and, quite frankly, do something that matters. This matters. Getting our kids to and from school matters. I have no doubt President Biden was a second grader at one time and probably rode a school bus to school. So the job matters.
Yeah, well, in fact, we learned over the summer that he drove a school bus when he was going to law school at Syracuse.
Oh, wow.
Throughout this whole, they've been pushing for electric school buses. And so he kind of went on the road show and went to visited some manufacturers. And he made that comment during a press conference.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So hey, the commander in chief can do it. So can you.
Maybe I can follow his career track, right?
Hey, you heard it here, folks. Sorry, we might have the start of something. So, well, Mike, really appreciate you coming on. What a story you have to tell. I encourage people to go to stonline.com, read the article that Taylor Hannon wrote. And like I mentioned at the top, if you Google Mike Mason, FBI, you're going to come up with Washington Post and local newspapers, national newspapers have written about him. Really appreciate you coming on and sharing your wisdom with us.
Well, thanks for having me, Ryan. I really appreciate it. And like I say, I hope anybody listening to this may consider becoming a bus driver and help out this shortage.
Thank you, Mike.
All righty. Thank you.
Hey, thank you so much, Mike, for joining on this episode, and to Ryan Gray for doing that interview. It was great. Mike is just a wealth of information, and I wrote an article, a wisdom profile piece on him. So if you guys haven't checked it out, definitely head over there. You can stnonline.com/go/wisdom. He just has so much information, such good stuff to share. I can't get over it. We also appreciate our sponsors, TransFinder and Friedman Seating. Check out stnonline.com for the latest news headlines on the school bus industry. And don't forget to learn more about our upcoming shows at stnexpo.com. Register on site for the TSD conference and for STN Expo Reno. I cannot wait to see you guys there. Subscribe, stream, review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, stnpodcast.com, wherever you guys listen. Thank you all so much, and we will see you next week.